In 1990, Sega was both maintaining the 8-bit Master System and heavily promoting the 16-bit Genesis in an effort to make inroads against the dominant Nintendo in the home video game market. That summer, Sega of America launched a new first-party magazine, Sega Visions, to both energize its user base and compete directly with Nintendo Power. On this episode of Classic Gaming Quarterly, joined by Coury Carlson from My Life in Gaming, let's read the inaugural issue of Sega Visions from June and July of 1990. All right, so today we are checking out the premiere issue of Sega Visions magazine from June and July of 1990. And we are joined by very special guest, Coury Carlson from My Life in Gaming. What's up, man?
Hey, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. All right. So I can't imagine there are too many people out there that don't know about Sega Visions, but on the off chance that you don't, this was sort of Sega's analog to Nintendo Power in that this was their, self-published first-party magazine. And this first issue obviously has a date of June and July of 1990 on it, but I don't know when it was actually out on newsstands. And I say that because if you read through the magazine, it's really mostly games from 89 and very early 90. So, the magazine may have just been out for a few months or something. Who knows? Now, much like Nintendo Power, tell me if you knew this, Coury. Much like Nintendo Power was sort of born out of the Nintendo Fun Club news, Sega Visions was born out of a free Sega newsletter that at one point was called the Sega Challenge newsletter, and then later was just called Sega, the Team Sega newsletter, and I actually have one right here. Like, this is much thinner than a Sega Visions. You can see we've got R-Type on the cover here, and then Reggie Jackson Baseball. This one's from January of 89, so this would have been one of the later issues. But anyway, I just thought that was a fun little tidbit. Did you know about that, Coury?
I didn't, and I never even looked at one before. Although I do recall one of them having Afterburner on the cover for some reason. Or maybe I'm thinking of something else.
That was actually kind of a nice surprise that I got this Sega Team newsletter because, I bought this issue of Sega Visions on eBay, and, I kind of felt like that was really more than I actually wanted to pay. And then when it showed up, it had this newsletter in with it.
Oh, that's
which was not stated in the auction. It was just like, here, have a bonus. And so that kind of helped, smooth over the fact that, I forgot what I paid for this, but I think it was about $50. So
that definitely makes it worth it then.
Yeah, that's how I felt. Anyway, on the cover here, you can see, I think this was also part of an ad they did at one point, this whole Sega for the 90s thing. And, they say the new generation, because of course at this time, the Sega Genesis was the next generation console. So, obviously they're going to try to push that. But, you see, you've got kind of going around this brick wall artwork here. You got Shinobi, Phantasy Star 2, Michael Jackson's Moonwalker, Golden Axe, although that is the artwork from the Master System cover for Golden Axe, Ghostbusters, Spider-Man, and, of course, Joe Montana Football. So I think we're going to go ahead and crack open the magazine.
I mean, this is the timing for this. I always think of, for me, when it switched from the 80s to the 90s, it was such a big deal, like in my life. I remember it, all the news talking about it. And that seemed such a more significant change in decades than any other since that I've experienced.
I agree. I remember being sad, like New Year's Eve, 1989. It's like even during the 80s, I think we knew we were living in an iconic decade. And so it was like a bummer when it was over.
But I mean, the entire cover, one of the things I like about it, this is the typical Sega grid pattern. And when you mention all the games that are on here, I mean, several of these, specifically Spider-Man, had never even really been shown at this point. They had the license for it, but I don't think that any gameplay had even been revealed.
Yeah, Spider-Man's an interesting one because they were promoting it pretty early on, but the game just kept getting delayed and delayed. and didn't come out until sometime in 1991, which is odd because if you play Spider-Man, it really has the feel of a much earlier Genesis game.
Yes.
And then when you play it along with other games that came out at around the same time, the game kind of feels a little bit dated.
Did you have a chance to read this? I mean, did you read this when it was new?
No, I actually was not aware. I mean, I wasn't really super... I mean, I can't say I wasn't aware of video game magazines. Obviously, I was, but I didn't really have money to blow on video game magazines when I was a kid. So, I knew about Nintendo Power just because a lot of my friends had subscriptions. But to be quite honest, I don't think I had ever heard of Sega Visions back then. Did you get these because you had a Sega Genesis? You got yours in '89, didn't you?
Yes, I got my Genesis, but before that, I also had had a Master System. So I don't even know how my name got on the list to receive this, but I had a friend get it, and then I got it that same day, and I have no idea. At one point, I had multiple copies of this magazine, of issue number 1.
Well, I heard you can get $50 a pop for them on eBay.
I know. Well, they are long gone now, but
yeah. Oh, yeah. I know. I'm joking.
I remember at the time being kind of bored by it, but as we'll see, I think it's pretty fun to look through now.
All right. Anyway, let's go ahead and get this thing open.
All right.
So on the inside cover here, I mean, I think I've featured this particular ad in at least a couple of my videos. It's just a really cool ad. It's got cool artwork, but I like what they're already kind of laying the groundwork, play with the big boys. Because a big way that the Genesis that Sega tried to promote the Genesis was by sort of making the Nintendo seem like it was for kids. And, if you wanted to be cool, like maybe your older brother or something, you needed to get on the Genesis bandwagon.
And using the artwork for the transformation in Altered Beast, I mean, that was, for the longest time, that was the iconic shot to show the power of the Genesis.
As you probably know, I don't ever read the table of contents because what for? So you can just go to the next page here. And then we have an ad for Air Diver. And am I remembering correctly? I know I talked about this in my Sega Genesis in 1990 video, but wasn't Air Diver one of the first 2 third-party published games on the Genesis?
Yeah,
I mean, I hate to skip ahead, but I know that there's actually a story in the back that I used in my Sega Genesis in 1990 video. Yeah, see right here, Seismic premieres 2 Genesis cartridges. So they were that was the first third-party publisher. Before that, I mean, there were third-party games that Sega published, or sometimes that Sega themselves ported to the Genesis and published. But Air Diver was one of the first 2 third-party published games. And, I mean, I don't know if you have any feelings about Air Diver, but for me, it's not really it plays a lot like, say, Top Gun on the NES. Or, I mean, maybe like Afterburner, but not nearly as good as Afterburner. But just the thing that sticks out to me about this game when I play it is, obviously you're inside the cockpit of a jet fighter, but just the incredible level of detail of the inside of that cockpit. Like, whoever's job it was at Seismic to do all the pixel art, to make the inside of the fighter jet, like, they took that job very seriously.
It's so detailed, but it takes up so much of the screen that it's almost annoying.
Yeah, I'd say you probably only have about 50% of the screen total showing what's going on outside the plane.
And not only that, but you have the different parts of the cockpit going, just like kind of segmenting the screen in different ways, and you have the HUD and everything. It's still a pretty cool game. And this is what I like to call as a game that is sold in the screenshots. See, people see that cockpit and they think, that looks amazing.
This game, I don't think definitely would not have been worth buying back then, but just to trudge out the old saying, this game would be a worthy weekend rental back then.
Absolutely. And I had a friend who had it, and I remember borrowing it from him, and him playing through it the first night that I borrowed it from him.
Like, you beat the game?
Yeah.
Oh, look at you.
Yeah, and now revisiting it, I was playing it just to prepare for this read through, and it's a lot harder than I remember it being. But the thing that I really liked about it, at this time, I had this obsession, I guess, with smoke trails when you shoot missiles. because Afterburner had these smoke trails whenever you shoot the missiles, and that was the biggest disappointment about Afterburner on the Master System, is it didn't have those smoke trails, and it made me not like the game at all. And this game it has smoke trails for the missiles.
Well, I mean, as any game worth its salt should. So I did want to just spend a little bit of time real quick taking a look at the masthead, just because there are a few recognizable names here. First at the top, under publishers, you have Al Nilsson, because Al Nilsson was the head of marketing for Sega of America, and I've talked about him before. Super nice guy. But there are two other names in here that maybe Coury, you'd like to tell us a little bit more about, just because I think you've been doing more work into this kind of thing. Just the two names that I've seen. If you see any others that stick out to you, feel free to say something. But you've got Arnie Katz and Bill Kunkel.
Right, and also Joyce Worley. They were kind of this trio that I believe were known for starting Electronic Games magazine, which is one of the first serious gaming magazines. After Electronic Games went away, I believe that they wrote for Video Games and Computer Entertainment. And then they probably got hired away and wrote for this before moving on to EGM and stuff like that.
Bill Kunkel is the game doctor, or was the game doctor,
yes.
Right? I'm not confusing him with somebody else. Didn't he write a column called The Game Doctor?
Yep. And whenever he is writing for a magazine, you'll always get a article about by the Game Doctor. And he passed away in 2011 at the age of 61.
Wow, that's too young.
Yeah, it is.
And then next to that, we've got a letter from the publishers. I'm not going to read it. I mean, this is the first issue of Sega Visions, so I mean, this is not the first time we've read the first issue of a magazine before, and generally it'll have a letter from the editor just sort of trying to explain their vision, pardon the pun, for the magazine, and that's really what's going on here. So moving on to the next page. So I thought this was interesting only because I've never seen one of these. Maybe you have. Sega's Timeout Family Amusement Centers.
Right.
And I mean, I don't know if you had those where you were. This certainly, from the pictures, this looks like it's probably in a shopping mall.
Right. I mean, Timeout was I did some research on it because I was familiar with the name. And Timeout was an arcade that started in the late 70s or early 80s that was known for having a really unique design to it. It's almost like space age. I got
to be very honest. I mean, I spent a lot of time in arcades and shopping malls, but I don't remember specifically, the name of the arcade. So it's possible I've been in a Timeout and just don't remember. But I certainly don't recall ever seeing an arcade that, said that it was owned by or associated with Sega.
Right. Well, I don't believe that they came into ownership until the mid 80s. And then they held on to it for a while before, I believe, Namco bought it.
And then I don't think you have this in the issue that you're looking at, but this is sort of a subscription card, except that what it actually is this is a card that you can fill out to have an issue sent to a friend of yours. So I wonder if that's why you ended up with multiple copies, is you may have had a friend or two fill this card out and put your name and address on it. It even says here, your friend will get their own free issue of Sega Visions, which is actually a pretty cool marketing tactic.
Yeah, especially if you don't tell your friend that you were sending it, and it just shows up one day.
And then on the next page here, this is also, I think, there's a lot of pages. I don't mean to keep trying to plug my own show, but there are a lot of pages in this issue that have ended up on my show. And this was another one. So this is an article about, Michael Katz, and I guess sort of an interview with him. So Michael Katz was the president of Sega of America right before Tom Kalinske. They ended up letting Michael Katz go and then hiring Tom Kalinske. So
Michael Katz mentions that Sega is currently setting up a group of highly talented and creative game designers and for programming both arcade and video games right here in California. And he's talking about STI, or Sega Technical Institute, who would also, be responsible for, Comic Zone, the majority of Sonic 2. Mark Cerny, who is most famous now for designing the PlayStation 4, was part of that group.
So on the next page here is an ad for the Sega Master System, which again I'm pretty sure I've used on my show. But I don't know. I just thought it was kind of a cool ad. I mean, you know, as you said, you had a Sega Master System. I did not have one. I only had an NES. But, you know, I was more familiar with the name Sega than I was with the name Nintendo until the NES became like the hot thing to have. Just because, as I've talked about, you know, multiple times in the show, I spent a lot of time playing arcade games in like the mid 80s before the NES came out. And so for me, Sega was, you know, a very recognizable arcade game like Bally Midway would be or something, you know, or Williams. And so when I saw, you know, I'd go to Toys R Us and see that Sega had this home video game system, that to me had more allure just because, you know, I knew that name. You know, to be honest, I think a big part of the reason I got a Nintendo is that, you know, it was 1987 and it was turning into like the cool kid thing to have, you know. But even after I had my NES, I still really kind of wanted a Sega Master System. Like when did you, if you want to talk about it a little bit, like when did you get your Master System, and did you have both a Master System and an NES?
I did not have both. I believe that I got my Master System, I want to say at Christmas of, I guess it probably would have been Christmas of 87, I'm guessing. It may have been 86, but I don't think they even came out in the US until 87. So everything kind of gets a little hazy at that point. So I got it for Christmas, and the reason I got it I asked for it for Christmas from Santa, was because I was obsessed with Space Harrier in the arcade. And once I saw that the Master System had Space Harrier, that was definitely the game system that I wanted. My brother would get an NES the following year for his birthday, but I was very much in the Sega camp. You know, there was always this rivalry between companies, obviously, even going back to 8-bit stuff. So I had a lot of friends that ended up getting a Master System because they played it at my house and didn't get an NES. But then we had other friends who bought an NES. So there's always this kind of rivalry between them. And for the longest time, even though I would get a Genesis, I would still play my brother's NES. I would rent games for it because places would not rent Master System games. And so I would always play certain things on his system, but I'd always, you know, kind of do it on the down low.
So, I mean, did you end up having like a decent library of Master System games then, or?
Yeah, I mean, I really want to say, I mean, looking at the games that are listed here, you know, there's a lot specific ones that really stand out to me. You know, Phantasy Star, obviously, one of the most important games that I've ever played, is like one of the most important games in my life. You know, Shinobi. There's a photo of me on Christmas Eve getting Shinobi, and I'm holding it up, and there's so much joy in my face because I was getting Shinobi finally after playing it in the arcade. Of course, Space Harrier and Alex Kidd in Miracle World, Outrun. But I mean, for the most part, I didn't really have a huge library. I had one of those friends. I mean, I feel like everyone had one of those friends, especially when you're in the video games, whose parents would just buy them like everything, buy them so many games. And it's like, how are you even getting all these games? And every week it was something new.
Then on the other side of the page, we just got done talking about the Game Doctor. I forgot this was here. So it's funny because it doesn't have Bill Kunkel's name on it anywhere that I see. But, you know, anybody that's been paying attention to retro gaming for a long time has heard of, you know, you always hear Bill Kunkel and the Game Doctor, you know, in the same breath. And you know, here it is. It's just sort of people were sending in their questions. I
don't think that any of these are written by...
These are not questions from specific people. It just says common questions. So it's possible that he just wrote the entire thing himself.
I mean, that is the great mystery. I mean, there is a letters section in here as well. And how did they even get these letters if they didn't have an address to send it to?
Well, I mean, they had the newsletter before this. So it's possible people were sending in letters to the newsletter.
Yeah, that is true. So they probably just ported a lot of those over.
You know, I don't usually spend too much time going through these, but just one thing I thought was kind of interesting is the second question. First it was 8-bit games, and now it's 16-bit games. Shouldn't I just wait for the 32-bit game systems to show up next year? But then also what's interesting is that the answer, from Bill Kunkel, actually mentions HDTV in 1990.
Yeah.
Since Genesis pushes TV capabilities to the limit, not really true, better game graphics will depend on HDTV, which is years away. Like, if you had asked me before I saw that, if HDTV was even an acronym that existed yet in 1990, I would have said no way.
Same here.
So, yeah. So, I mean, that's pretty crazy.
Yeah, it was very surprising to see that.
All right, so on the next page here, we've got the Game Wizards. Who are you going to call? I'm kind of surprised they got away with putting who you going to call, because I thought that was trademarked by the whoever owns the rights to Ghostbusters. But whatever. And I think you had a tendency to call these Sega Game Wizards on occasion, didn't you?
I called the Sega Game Counselors all the time, and I became, kind of phone friends with a lot of them. So much so that I would get handwritten letters from many of them. And what's interesting is that in later issues of Sega Visions, these same game counselors would show up in different segments. There are certain ones that would be featured. So somewhere in my basement here, I have a whole thing full of stuff that I got from the Sega Game Counselors. And I mean, it was cool. The reason I kind of got into it was because at the time I was a friend of mine and myself were writing a fanzine, and we use that as kind of our in. We say, hey, we're gonna do this magazine. Can we ask you for some inside info? And then we just call and end up spending hours on the phone with different people. So much so that I would always call and hang up if I didn't get somebody I knew. And I would keep on trying until I got somebody I knew.
So do you think, did you ever actually get any cool scoop to put in your fanzine?
No. There's no scoops or anything like that. But I would get a lot of these hint sheets that came. They had walkthroughs for games. Had hand-drawn maps for Phantasy Star, some stuff for Miracle Warriors and stuff like that. And, I would get a lot of really interesting stuff. I got some photos of stuff from CES at the time that people took, and it was I probably spent too much time calling them, but it was fun. It was fun.
That's pretty cool. So you're saying you would just call and the person at the other end, oh, that's Mark or whatever that you knew, and you would just be like, hey, this is Coury.
Yes.
And wow. That's pretty cool.
And sometimes they would transfer me to other people, and I just get passed around to different people I knew. If they didn't want to talk to me anymore. I wonder if I ever got anybody in trouble because I kept them on the phone for so long.
Yeah.
And that it's so interesting because I always wonder what happened to a lot of those people. And I wonder if any of those people have ever seen any either of our shows and say, would say, hey, I knew that kid.
But I mean, don't you think, you must have enough reach. I feel like you could at least tweet out hey, if you knew anybody that used to be a Sega game counselor,
Yeah. It was late 80s, early 90s. So it was, a lot of these people, I think about them now, they seem so much older than me at the time. They're all 18, 19 years old. And I was 12. So they always seem so much older than me. But I wonder what they're doing now.
Then we got this little flap here says watch for your Sega trading cards at page 25, so that'll give us something to look forward to. And then we have the Sega mailbox, and we've got a few letters in here. The first one, several weeks ago, I purchased the Genesis Entertainment System, which is not the official name of that product. After viewing Altered Beast and Revenge of Shinobi, I like this. My Nintendo and 26 games have been sold to a beginner. I sold my NES to some simp.
The Nintendo could not keep their interest.
Yeah.
Maybe because one thing is brand new, the other thing you've had for a while.
And then the second letter here talks about R-types. That's cool.
Yeah.
I'd like to praise your work on the Sega Genesis game system. Oh, I'm a computer engineer, and I am duly impressed with the quality of the graphics, blah, blah, blah. I am aware that your Master System has a cartridge of the arcade game R-Type. I greatly enjoy this game and would like to see a Genesis version. What do you think? That would have been cool.
Yeah.
Just because they could have made an arcade perfect version of R-Type on the Genesis.
Well, what's interesting about that is, that's obviously one person that wants, R-Type on the Genesis. And one of the things that we learned when we were making the documentary on M2 is that after the people at M2 made Gauntlet 4, they were looking for another project. And one of the things that they wanted to make was a Genesis port of R-Type Leo. But Sega told them, no, there's not enough interest for that. And then had them do Gunstar Heroes instead.
And then the last one, it's just more, it's just people, sucking up to Sega. So
Yes.
we're just going to kind of move on.
There's a lot of sucking up going on in this magazine. I noticed.
Yeah. And then on the next page, again, I think I've used this on my show, but the Sega decade is here. And, as is the case with a lot of this magazine, this really just comes off almost as like an advertisement.
No, I mean, it's kind of a waste of a couple pages, I feel like, for them, because it's just self-congratulating. Hey, look at the stuff that's coming out.
Yeah, I mean, if I would have been 13 when, in June and July of 1990, I'm not reading all this when I'm, this is TLDR to a 13-year-old.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And it even continues on here on the next page, although here they actually list off a few games.
Yeah.
So maybe we could just talk about the games real fast.
Sure. I think probably the most notable thing to talk about, of all these games listed here. I mean, Moonwalker, I don't believe is shown in any screenshots in this entire issue. Is the Ultimate 4 for the Master System never came out in the U.S.
And then the game on the other side of the page here, I was hoping that I could put you on the spot to talk about a little bit if you have any. This is kind of the one, I always make sure I go through these magazines and play all the games. And I played a little bit of Psycho Fox, but I don't feel like I played enough of it to really be able to speak intelligently about it, other than to say that from what I played, it seemed like a really cool game. But,
Yeah.
Is this a game that you ever played when you were a kid or that you've played since?
I had a friend who had it, and I didn't play it that much when it came out. I mean, I didn't play it that much when he had it, but I later on purchased it, and I mean, it's good. It's weirdly momentum based. I mean, it's very good for the time. I believe it was developed by Vic Tokai, because the reason I know that is because it had these kind of spiritual successors on the Genesis.
Decap Attack.
Decap Attack was like a remake of a Japanese game's like Magical Hat Adventure, but they both play very similarly. Like they that same momentum based, and the very weird animation on the attacks, where it's just like this, this arm that extends out that looks really weird. But both those games play very, very similarly, and they have the same kind of bonus round stuff. And I never made it very far into this game. It's pretty challenging.
All right. So next page. So again, you were the Master System owner back then, so I will definitely be wanting your opinions on both of these. But it's funny because I did that video forever ago about the history of Golden Axe or whatever it was called, and so obviously I talked about this Master System version of the game, and I mentioned it briefly, and I would say I didn't speak very positively about it. Like I don't think it's very good.
It is not very good.
I think
at all.
some of that probably just has to do with the limitations of the hardware.
Yes.
But you can only play as this guy. This is Axe Battler, right? You can only play as him, although you can choose. You can use the magic that Tyrus Flare or Gilius Thunderhead would have. But you have to pick that when you start your game. Like, do you want to use Earth Magic or what is it? Is it Earth, Wind, and Thunder or something like that? I forgot.
Yeah, it was Earth, Fire, and Thunder.
I keep wanting to say like Earth, Wind, and Fire, but that was a group from the 70s. When you grow up, you have whatever game system you have, and you have whatever games you have for that game system, and it's like you kind of have to learn to love them because those are the games that you have available to you to play. And so I feel like that's kind of, if you grew up, especially like in the UK or Brazil, where the Master System was more popular, if you had the Golden Axe, the Master System version of Golden Axe, then that's what you were going to play, and you probably have some great memories playing it. And I'm sure, Coury, you must have games like that as well.
Oh, yeah. This game is not one of them.
No. Did you have this game?
I didn't because I already had a Genesis by this time.
Oh, right.
And the Genesis version was out, and the Genesis version is amazing.
Yeah.
And this it's so choppy. Yeah, there's no impact behind any of the hits, and it is not good. It is not good, and I can't believe they dared to say that it has arcade quality graphics.
Yeah.
They started out with it.
False advertising. But on the other side of the page, we have California games.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, California games, I think, came out on, like, everything.
Yeah.
I believe it started off as a Commodore 64 game,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it came out on pretty much every home computer platform in existence. And then it came out on the NES. It came out on the Master System, which is this is the version they're showing here. I think I want to say it even came out on the Genesis.
On the Genesis, it was one of the later black box era games.
For me personally, I would say California Games is most noteworthy as the pack-in game for the Lynx, just because I had a Lynx.
Right.
I really like the game. I think I would recommend anybody should try playing it. Just the caveat is that California Games is not a game that you are just going to pop in and start playing and have any idea what you're doing. Like, you really need to RTFM with this game. Thankfully, you can just download a manual like from Sega Retro or something, but for the most part, if you try just playing this game without knowing the controls, you're going to get frustrated and you're like, oh, this game sucks, and you're going to quit playing it. But if you just take a minute to look, I mean, you're only talking about 2 buttons. It's not rocket science. But if you learn what the controls are, the game is infinitely more enjoyable.
Yeah. I mean, I played it on the Commodore 64. We had a lot of these, like the Epix games on the Commodore 64. It's like, California games, World games, Winter games.
Winter games.
Yep. Stuff like that. So I played this, but like you, I mean, I had an Atari Lynx instead of a Game Boy, and that's what I played it the most on as well. And I still think that it's very, very difficult to play. Almost nothing in this game is intuitive.
Oh, I agree with that. Definitely. But some of it, like, I just felt some of the gameplay in this game is just so smooth.
Yeah.
Obviously it's a collection of mini games, and some of those mini games are better than others. But like specifically the surfing is just like I said, it's just very smooth and very enjoyable. And the other one that I really like a lot is the event called Flying Disc, which, because of course they can't say Frisbee or they'll get in trouble. But it uses almost a golf style like swing system. It's 2 clicks instead of 3 clicks, I guess.
Yeah.
To throw the Frisbee. And then once you throw the Frisbee, you take control of the other person. You have to catch the Frisbee. But just the way the background is scrolling while the Frisbee is in the air just like looks really impressive, I think, in the same way that when you're surfing, all the scrolling looks really cool.
Flying Disc is very fun, but I was not able to catch a single throw.
It's not easy. Well, you have to push up on the controller when you want to catch it, right?
I did not know that.
See, you got to read the RTFM, man. All right, that's enough of that one. Next we have Reggie Jackson Baseball. And I think the nicest thing I can say about Reggie Jackson Baseball is on the title screen, they did a really good job of like it actually looks like Reggie Jackson, which for an 8-bit system, I think that's pretty impressive.
I mean, I'm not a big baseball fan in the first place, so it doesn't really do much for me in terms of playing any game. I mean, I do kind of like timeless sort of baseball, but
I like that game a lot. But this game, like, there's parts of it that are good. It's got like cool presentation. The batting feels awful. It reminds me of NES Baseball, like the NES game that's just called Baseball, which I think might have been a launch game actually, where like all the fielders feel like they're wearing concrete boots. The only difference is in this game is at least once the fielder gets the ball, they can throw it pretty fast. So I'll give them that. But overall, I was very disappointed with this game, which is too bad because great baseball for the Master System is anything but. So if you had a Master System, I don't know if maybe there just wasn't a good baseball game. for you to play.
Yeah, just sports games in general. I don't think that sports games in general really, for me at least, didn't really came into their own until the 16-bit generation.
Well, I mean, I think there were quite a few good sports games on the NES. In fact, some of my favorite baseball games are on the NES.
Oh, okay.
And then on the next page, we have Niles Nemo in Sega Land, which I guess is just, you know, I don't know if somebody over at Sega of America was like, all right, well, Nintendo Power has Howard and Nestor, so we got to have our own thing. Because then I think it was Game Pro that also had like this, you know, sort of comic.
Yeah.
Certainly now I have like no interest in these at all. Like I get all these old magazines and I read them, and as soon as I get to a comic, I'm just like, nope, and I skip it.
Yep.
But
Same here.
I think, to be honest, when I was 12, I would have thought this was pretty cool. Like I certainly would have read it. So you had these magazines as a kid. Like, did you think this was cool, or did you just think it was a waste of space then?
Yeah, I didn't really have any interest in it then either. And reading it now, I think it's almost insufferable to read. Niles Nemo he just comes off like a douchebag the entire time. And I think that what I think is the most revealing thing about this is that the design of Alex Kidd, I think, is impossible to get right in anything. I mean, it does not translate to any. He's just not like a good looking character design in first place. I love Miracle World, and I like Enchanted Castle a lot, but the character design of Alex Kidd is just impossible to. I mean, he's just not appealing in any way, and he looks obnoxious here too.
All right, well then let's not spend any more time on that. Well, here you set yourself up. Did you do that on purpose?
Yeah.
Next page,
I knew
Alex Kidd in the Enchanted Castle, which was a very early 1990 release on the Sega Genesis. So I'm not super into this game. You know, I had it on my Genesis in 1990 episode, and you know, I'm just going to say what I have to say about the game because I feel like you're going to have a lot more to say about it. So the only thing I'm going to say, I thought it was definitely a fun game. Just for me, when you look at it amongst sort of the totality of the Genesis library, especially early on, and you take into consideration Sega's marketing campaign for the Genesis, especially early on, Alex Kidd just kind of seems like it doesn't fit.
Right.
That being said, the game is fun, and I enjoyed playing it for that episode. But was this a game that you actually had?
I didn't have it. I had a friend, that friend who had everything, also had this. And what I like to view it as is that this is a game that was specifically made for Master System owners who are familiar with the character. So this was kind of a way to entice them to say, hey, this character that you know is going to be on this new system. But also, and this is kind of the key thing about it, is that finally, after so many games, they make a game that is similar to Miracle World. Because Miracle World was a pretty good game for its time, and especially, you know, among the other games on the Master System. And they came out with many sequels, but nothing had a similar gameplay style as the first one. They were just constantly doing different stuff. And by having this being a throwback to the first one, that immediately said, okay, so they finally did what everyone was hoping, who was a fan of the first one, has been hoping that they would do. And a lot of people say it's not nearly as good, and it isn't. It isn't as good as Miracle World, but they brought back, you know, the rock, paper, scissors, like Jenkin, and like all the vehicles. I guess the level design don't feel like as sprawling as they did in the first one. In the first one, it really felt like you're moving through like this enormous world. And here it doesn't quite have that same feel.
On the other side of the page, on the other hand, we have what I would probably say was like the biggest heavy hitter Genesis game when it came out.
Yes.
And that's Revenge of Shinobi. Did you have this game?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, this was... I still feel that this is probably a top 10 game on the system. Maybe even top 5. But I had this... I specifically remember getting it because I had saved up some money, and I was going to have my My mom, I sent her. She went to Toys R Us, which was in Erie, Pennsylvania. So it was kind of a drive. It was about an hour, and she was going there. I said, "Can you stop at Toys R Us and get me Golden Axe?" And I guess if they don't have Golden Axe, will you get me Shinobi? I mean, it looked good. I liked the first one, but it was not something I was really after. I was really after Golden Axe. And she came back, didn't have Golden Axe. They had Revenge of Shinobi. And I feel like that is one of the kind of the happiest mistakes, I guess. The circumstances played out in my favor, I feel, because Revenge of Shinobi is an amazing game. It is, I've something I still regularly go back to or come back to now. And, I think it is the best game in the series. A lot of people will say that Shinobi 3 is better, but I feel it's a perfect mix of of faster gameplay that would be evolved in Shinobi 3, but also a slower style of the original. So I think it's very much the best game in the series.
Yeah, I mentioned how I didn't really make time to play enough Psycho Fox to talk about it. And part of the reason for that was I spent too much time playing this game because I realized, because I've already covered so many of these games on the show, I already have gameplay footage for a lot of them. But I looked and I didn't really have very much Revenge of Shinobi footage because back when I made that episode, I was recording gameplay footage using, a DVD recorder, et cetera, et cetera. And so it wasn't like up to snuff. And so I had to record new gameplay footage. So I did, but then it just made me want to keep playing the game. Like after I got the footage I needed and I was done with that, I just kept playing through the game more just because I like it so much.
And it's fun. And then for me these days, I always hit a brick wall on the second to last level in the Bay Area with the waves. It's best music in the game, I feel like, on that level. But there's specific jumps where you have to be frame accurate and doing your double jump to make it. And I always get stuck there.
So have you ever actually beaten the game?
Oh yeah. I mean, I have.
Oh, all right.
But I mean, coming back to it now, every time I play it now, that's always my limit.
Yeah. All right. So on the next page, we have once again the semi-official game of Classic Game Room, and that is, of course, Truxton. It's funny because Classic Game Room is kind of not really a big deal anymore, but if you were watching video game videos on YouTube like 10 years ago, he was one of the most popular gaming personalities on YouTube. Mm-hmm. And, in some sense, I think he just liked the way the word Truxton sounded coming out of his mouth.
I think that's the case for a lot of the stuff that he says.
Yeah. But it really is a very cool game. It's probably not, in my opinion, worth the price that it commands. I mean, I don't even know what it's up to now. Like the last time I looked at the price, it was like $80 for a complete copy. It might be even more than that now. I think it's a good game, but not a great game. And I think that's kind of what I said in the video, is that this is a good game, but the hype surrounding it is sort of greater than the game itself. Is this a game? Did you get to play this game?
No, I mean, this is
back in 1990 or
what I think is the most impressive thing about this feature on it is that neither of the two screenshots show the smart bomb.
The skull.
Yeah, which is the iconic image from the game. And that is something that probably sold a lot of copies of this game.
Well, I even kind of I wouldn't say it was a joke about it, but in the video that I did, I showed pages from I think 4 different video game magazines that all showed that screenshot of the bomb, just because, as you just said, that seemed to be what, everybody felt was this is the cool shot. I wish I had the box down here, because I wonder if it's on the back of the box. I almost can't imagine it not being back there.
I never really played it until many, many years later. And I mean, it's cool. I finished it last year during a live stream, and I really like the difficulty in it. I mean, it's not an easy game, but I like that the way that the difficulty and the checkpoint system work on it, that if you get stuck someplace, it will sometimes skip you to like pass the problem part, or if it skips you ahead and you die immediately, then it sends you back 2 checkpoints, so that it allows you to just keep on practicing. But it's cool. I always like the way that when you attack enemies, they don't just like blow up, or like the bigger ones, they'll slowly catch on fire. Like different parts of them will catch on fire. I mean, this is the first of many Toaplan games on the Genesis.
But I mean, I agree. It's it's a really cool game, and I really enjoy it. All I'm saying is I don't think it lives up to maybe the hype that surrounds it, and certainly not the price. But and then I think I'm going to kind of let you go on the other game here on the other side. We have Phantasy Star 2, which I've certainly played, but I'm guessing that you've played it a lot more and probably have much more of an opinion about it than I do.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, the first Phantasy Star was one of the most important games in my life. It really opened up my view of what a video game could be, and feelings that it could give you. So I was excited for this for basically the first time I heard that it was coming, and maybe in many ways this was probably the reason I wanted a Genesis as early as I did, is because I knew that this was coming. A lot of people will say that it's one of the best games in the series, and I feel like it's probably my least favorite. And the main reason for that is because it came with a hint book walkthrough in the package. I guess to kind of give some context, I had an experience with the original with a friends where we were kind of playing through the game together. We both had our own copies, but we would share secrets and stuff like that. We played through it, but played through it together, but separately. And it was a shared experience. And it was because of that, I was so excited to recreating that same thing for the second one. And because it came with that hymn book, I couldn't restrain myself, and I just read through the entire hymn book the night that I got the game, which basically destroyed the entire experience of discovering the game yourself. From that point on, I felt like I finished it, but I was kind of going through the motions.
No, that's understandable. I think it was Al Nilsson that pushed to have that hint book included, partially because of the price of this game.
Yeah.
They had to charge more for the game because of the extra memory, and he felt like including a hint book would at least give some added value. And I think maybe he felt like that made the game more accessible.
Yes.
Well, that's too bad that the included strategy guide kind of ruined Phantasy Star 2 for you. But it's just kind of like a fine line, right? Because the first couple of times I tried playing a role-playing game as a kid, I just had no idea what I was doing.
Right.
And I had no guide. And so that kind of ruined the game for me that way. But it just sounds like, this just, sort of swung the pendulum entirely in the other direction.
Yeah. And I've had a lot of people criticize me. I think I did a video where I talked about that. I've had a lot of people criticize me saying oh, you should just have some restraint. And it's I was 12. I mean, what do you want me to do? It's an easy mistake to make. And I'll tell you though, that it was a learning experience, and I never did that again. Phantasy Star 2, it was still very good though, despite all that. It very much established what I feel is the iconic look for the series going forward. And you see the image in the center of the page here. There's something about this image, and I think that's a very unpopular opinion, but I really like this cover art, or just this piece of artwork in general, because it's so alien and weird that I can't believe that they actually put that on the cover of the game. It's weird, but I don't think that it looks anything what the game itself looks like. And if you see the Japanese cover art, and it's very much a similar image, but it feels more like the game world that's represented in game. But still, I mean, Phantasy Star 2, still very good. Maybe the best soundtrack in the entire series. The team that made Phantasy Star 2, it's kind of crazy that they made it in 6 months.
So they made it in 6 months to the detriment of the game.
Yes, very much so.
It's I was going to say that is I wish you could see what their vision was, if they could have completed the game,
Yeah.
It's kind of funny because I feel like that blue sort of grid whatever during the battle screens has become like an iconic part of the game for people. But, you know, it wasn't supposed to be that way. It was supposed to have like actual scenery like the first Phantasy Star.
Right. And in many ways, you can say that the first game is almost a better looking game in some respects. But, I mean, it works.
So on the next page is Zoom, which this was another game that I covered in the Genesis in 1989 video. And sort of the joke I made about Zoom in that video, you know, I said it's the kind of game that your grandma would get you for Christmas, you know.
Right.
And it's kind of true, but, you know, certainly if I'd only had a handful of games back then and Zoom was one of them, I wouldn't be, you know, too happy about that. But, you know, just playing it, recording some gameplay footage, or back in the day playing it, you know, as a rental or something, I think it's pretty cool. In some ways, it kind of reminds me a little bit of Kicks, you know, in that you're kind of moving around, you know, sort of drawing these squares.
Right.
But, you know, here it's on a grid, whereas in Kicks, it was just you could kind of go wherever you wanted to go, as long as you didn't get killed.
Yeah.
But, I mean, do you have any thoughts on Zoom?
I mean, I did not play this back in the day, and this is definitely something that I would not have bought. I would have no interest in buying it. But you're right. It is pretty cool. Just like moving along the lines and make on the grid is pretty fun. It's I think that it is probably an underappreciated game these days. I always say that this period of time, I call it the Genesis black box era, is probably my favorite time in Sega history. And even this game, you know, has a really good soundtrack compared to stuff that would come out later on in the system's life, especially.
And then we got a little bit of foreshadowing earlier in the issue that this was coming, but over here we've got our trading cards. And I noticed that my issue here and your issue as well still has the trading cards in it.
Yes.
Which kind of makes me wonder, like, you know, I wonder how popular it was for kids to rip these out of here. Just because what were you really going to do with them? But they're pretty cool, though. I'm not sure I'm sure I should know this and I just don't, but who's Rippin' Rick?
He's from California Games.
You know, one thing I didn't mention about California Games that I thought was really neat was that it had actual sponsors in the game.
Yes, like Kawasaki and...
Yeah, like I was, you know, anytime I play that game, obviously, you know, I'm on Team Casio. But yeah, it's got Kawasaki or OP. Remember, like, you know, that was a popular clothing brand when we were kids, Ocean Pacific. But what's it got on the back of these cards? Oh, it's got...
It has, like, bios and
well, it's cool that it's got a hint,
yeah.
Like one hint for each character.
One of the things that immediately jumped out to me is that they misspelled Musashi as Musa. It should have been Musashi, but it says Musashi.
That seems like a pretty big thing to overlook.
Yes.
But isn't he Joe Musashi?
Yeah.
So why doesn't it just say Joe?
I don't know. They could have put Shinobi on there.
Anyway, then we get to, you know, Sega did a bunch of these sort of iconic ads, you know, where it was like a 3-page ad and the first page would just be black with a little bit of white text. You know, they had some of these that were game specific. Mm-hmm. Like I know there was one for Phantasy Star 2. There was one for Strider. This one's just sort of a little bit more generic. So, you know, Genesis Does, of course, was one of their early catchphrases that they used in some of their TV commercials. And so in this case, when we turn the page, we got, of course, What Nintendo Don't. And then they're just showing a selection of games here. Interestingly enough, most of them are sports games.
Yeah.
Which I only say that just because, you know, the Genesis, I think, at least for, I don't know if that's still really the perception or not, but at least for a long time, even after the Genesis was no longer relevant, I think it had more of a reputation as being like a sports gamer's platform. And so it's interesting to see that kind of play out here. And then just the two things I kind of wanted to point out, and maybe you'll have stuff to point out too. But first of all, that's, of course, not the final Spider-Man cover art. But I'm sure that was not, you know, known yet because at this point, Spider-Man was still a ways out from coming out. And then I think I mentioned this in my video, but I'll just say it again that, you know, Pat Riley Basketball was at one time being called Pat Riley's Slammin' and Jammin' Basketball. Was there anything else here that you wanted to discuss?
No, I mean, basically, Spider-Man is the only one of these games that I owned at the time. And Spider-Man is still a ways off, but that was the only one that I got even remotely close to launch or release of it.
Okay, on the next page, all right, so this is game gossip. So I guess you could think like Quarterman kind of stuff. And I think I mentioned this in my Genesis in 1990 video, but I don't remember really what I said. But, obviously this is an article about, Sega signing their endorsement deal with Joe Montana, which I forgot. They had to give Joe Montana, it was at least $1 million in sort of as a royalty fee advance. Mm-hmm. And I actually talked to Al Nilsson about how this all went down, because I think he was the one that ended up having to go to an airport somewhere and meet with Joe Montana in the Flyers Club kind of frequent Flyers Club and kind of pitch the idea to him. But sort of the main thing I wanted to say about this is I just feel like, at least for a long time, I feel like there was this notion that Tom Kalinske came into Sega and then they started signing all these endorsement deals. And that's just simply not true. As we see here, at this time, Michael Katz was still running Sega of America, and you can see you've got this Joe Montana signing, but then back here, we've got Tommy Lasorda baseball, Pat Riley basketball, Michael Jackson's Moon. I mean, all of these, really these are all licensed games, but with the exception of Spider-Man, who is of course fictitious, the rest of these were actual people that were signed by Sega, and that was in the Michael Katz era.
Yeah, I mean, I was certainly not a big. I guess I was still a couple of years out from being a big football fan, which I was for a couple of years, in the early '90s. When the Buffalo Bills were winning and going to Super Bowls, it was a very exciting time. But I mean, I didn't know anything about Joe Montana at all. I mean, he was just...
Yeah, I mean, if you're not into sports, then sure. But, at this time in 1990, Joe Montana was a 4-time Super Bowl champion. Obviously, he was the quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers, which would have been the local team for Sega of America. Right. So I don't know if that factored in at all. I mean, I would say he was the most popular quarterback in the NFL. And so I think that probably had more to do with it.
Yeah, I feel like that probably had some sort of effect on it, though.
And then we already flipped over and looked at this. So I'll just point out again, this, because to me, this was kind of a big deal that, Seismic premieres 2 new Genesis cartridges. And again, these were the first 2 third-party published cartridges. We already talked about Air Diver. And I mean, I don't really have anything interesting to say about Super Hydlide.
It's not that great of a game. We had a chance when we interviewed M2. We had a chance to interview the gentleman who created Hydlide, and I said that Super Hydlide was the only one that I really played, and he's like, I don't really like that one too much. I'm not too proud of that one.
I mean, I think the original one is cool, but I think the problem is maybe you probably know this. I guess I forgot what system Hydlide came out for originally, but it was, I think it was a Japanese home computer.
Yes, and then there was an NES version, but I mean, I don't know what home computer it was for.
The NES version is a pretty faithful port of the original, and so if you're playing on the NES, you're thinking this game seems like it just plays like it's old.
Yeah,
but it's just because I mean, at that point it was old. So
yeah, I mean, it's not my preferred kind of RPG.
And then here, I don't think you have this in your copy either. We have the Sega Gamers Ballot, which, these were popular things for these magazines to have. It was just sort of a reader card for you to send back in. Just for example, you have, question 1. After reading the review about Psycho Fox, will you A, buy it, B, consider buying it, or C, not buy it? And I mean, all of the questions are kind of about that. I don't know if you want to go through this. They have this little article, new Master System games just for you. They just list off some games that are going to be coming out. But I mean, was there anything in here specifically that you wanted to touch on, or?
I mean, there's some good stuff listed in here, and some games that are actually nowadays are very expensive. But I think what is very prevalent in this issue in different articles is that they talk about how there's all this stuff coming out for the Master System still. They didn't want Master System owners to feel like they're just being left in the dust. For Genesis stuff, they said, "Oh, we have a new Master System game coming out every month for like 14 months or something like that." They said there's like 14 new games in the pipeline for it. So, I mean, they really tried to be inclusive of Master System fans. I mean, more than half of this magazine is dedicated to Master System. But I mean, you see stuff like Alex Kidd in Shinobi World. It's one of the most expensive games on the system. Same with Golden Axe Warrior. All some of the best games on the system, honestly.
So then here on the next page, so this is kind of cool. This is like, it says, graduate to Genesis. And this really kind of seems like it was maybe geared towards people that were existing Master System owners that were going to be, I mean, part of the reason that they use the theme graduate to Genesis is that when this magazine was out, it's like, end of the school year season. But you can see that, the whole idea here is that you're going to buy a Genesis and you can send away, and they'll send you a power base converter for free so that you can still play your existing Master System library. And then over here, they'll give you a choice where they will send you either one free Genesis game from, I'm assuming only from they show down here. There's only certain games you can pick, obviously. Or you can get 2 Master System games. So that's pretty, and that includes some good games like East is here and R-Type is here, and Afterburner, which I understand that you like quite a bit. So I mean that's actually a really good deal. I mean, compared
super
to
good deal.
At the beginning we saw that Toys R Us ad, which it was just like, hey, here's a Genesis for $189. But this way you got the Genesis plus a power base converter plus at least one free game.
Right.
So that's pretty awesome.
I mean, I don't know how much the power base converter sold for at release, but being able to get that or getting 2 Master System games, I mean, it says $80 retail value. I mean, are they saying that 2 Master System games are $40 each and Genesis games are $80, which is entirely possible. I mean, Phantasy Star 2 was definitely $80 when it came out, but that's not offered on here, obviously.
And then what's this on the other page? Like they're trying to get you to take screenshots with high scores, but they don't have a high. I guess they weren't prepared for this. So I don't believe I have Sega Visions issue 2, but maybe by then those started showing up. Because of course Nintendo Power did the same thing.
Right, and that's just yet another check mark of things that they felt that every gaming magazine needed to have. You have to have high scores. You have to have a tips and tricks section and stuff like that. Yeah.
And then here now we're basically on the last page, and we have some brief previews, or as they call them, coming attractions. So there's only 2 games on here, so that makes it easy. Up at the top here we have Moonwalker, which is of course Michael Jackson's Moonwalker. I like this game. I wouldn't say I love it. If somehow you removed Michael Jackson from it and just made it just sort of a generic side-scrolling action game, I don't think it would be nearly as cool. But the fact that it has like the digitized versions of Michael Jackson music in it and whatnot is pretty neat. Growing up in the 80s, I mean, Michael Jackson was like the biggest pop star in the world, and so having this game featuring him, I think was pretty neat. And like I said, I like the game.
It's cool. It is cool. My favorite part of it is the very, very beginning. Is when he first shows up and he flicks the quarter across the room
into the jukebox. Yep. Best
part of the game, and also probably the best part of the movie.
Yeah. And then down below we have Ghostbusters, which I said this when I did the Genesis in 1990 video, that I think this is a cool game, and it's a licensed property from, I would say, one of the most popular and well-loved movies from the 80s, but you just don't ever hear anybody talking about Ghostbusters for the Genesis.
Right. And it is a great game. I did a video pretty early on the channel about it, but it's a great game. It's a compile game, and I remember hearing that it was just like a job that they were hired for. There's no real passion or anything for it, but it turned out to be really good, like regardless.
How could you not, if somebody comes to you and says, hey, we want to make a video game about Ghostbusters, how can you not have passion for that?
I don't know.
And then kind of, I don't know, maybe ironic's not the right word, but I just think it's interesting that on the inside of the front cover, as we saw, we have the Toys R Us ad. And then on the inside back cover, we have what I would argue was Toys R Us's largest competitor.
Yes.
And that's KB Toys, which I could probably make a whole episode of Flashback just talking about KB Toys. So, I mean, don't get me started. But I miss that store.
I do too.
But also interesting is that they're at least offering you a little bit of a deal here. Mm-hmm. Obviously, there's no deal here buying the Genesis. Although, again, you could buy this Genesis for full price, pick up a game using this. So this $10 off coupon is applicable to games. So you could grab a second game for $10 off and then take the receipt from KB and send it into Sega and get that deal that we just talked about a couple pages ago. So this was definitely not a bad time to get into the Genesis.
And the games you can choose from are excellent.
Yeah, I don't know if it's actually limited to these Genesis games or not, but I mean, Arnold Palmer Tournament Golf I like, but I understand that's not like a heavy hitter game. Probably the same for Tommy Lasorda Baseball. But yeah, you've got Revenge of Shinobi, Ghouls and Ghosts, and Golden Axe on here as well, along with Forgotten Worlds and Mystic Defender, which, those are okay. And
probably, I mean, Ghouls and Ghosts, probably surprising to some people. I always get surprised reactions when I say this, but Ghouls and Ghosts is probably my favorite Genesis game.
I mean, I guess I would find that a little bit surprising just because there are so many great games in the Genesis library, but I absolutely love the Genesis version of Ghouls and Ghosts, and I play it regularly, so I'm not that shocked that you would say that. I remember, I mean, this has nothing to do specifically with this ad, but my friend Anthony bought his Genesis in 1990, maybe a month or two after this, I think late summer. And at that time, I don't know if this was only something KB Toys was doing or if it was a Sega promotion, but you could go into KB Toys, at least I think it was only KB. That's where he bought his, was a KB Toys, so maybe it wasn't just KB, but he went in there and bought his Genesis with Altered Beast, and you could literally just pick another game and have it for free.
That's amazing.
Like you didn't have to mail away for it or anything. You could just get it. Because I remember, he told this story on his podcast a long time ago, but he went in there and got the Genesis with Altered Beast, and then he wanted Revenge of Shinobi, and they were out of stock, and so he ended up getting Pat Riley Basketball, because he was a big sports gamer, so it's not that strange. But at the same time, like Revenge of Shinobi down to Pat Riley Basketball is a pretty huge downgrade.
Yes,
because it's not even a good basketball game.
Yeah, that's another game that I feel was sold on screenshots of people doing slam dunks.
Oh yeah, the screenshots. Yeah, that's the thing. That little cutscene, if you want to call it that, of the slam dunk, which was reminiscent of Double Dribble.
Right.
But really, that was like the only good part of the game. And then the back cover, unfortunately, doesn't really have anything that I would consider interesting. This is just this Niles Nemo. You called him a D-bag. That's your word, not mine.
I mean, he just looks obnoxious, doesn't he?
I mean, kind of, but he's got like that style of sunglasses would have been very popular at the time.
Yes.
I don't know about having a popped collar. I don't remember that being popular, but I mean, it's just too bad that the back cover doesn't have like an ad on it, or at least maybe a Sega ad for a game instead of having, Niles Nemo. I think that's a little bit disappointing. So that's it. So that's Sega Visions issue number 1. Coury, big thanks to you for coming on the show. I know this was a very long show. I feel like anytime the two of us get together, whether it's on the phone or in person or however, it's like we're like two teenage girls or something. Like we talk on the phone for like hours.
I mean,
teenage girls without the gossipiness.
I don't know anybody else I could talk to about a 30-page magazine for over an hour.
We did talk about maybe making this a thing that we do more often, so we'll see how this turns out and how people like it. But I think it's a little bit more interesting sometimes for me to, be able to read through a magazine with someone instead of just doing it by myself, especially in a case like this where you actually had a Master System, and you actually had that issue of Sega Visions back in the day, so you were able to bring something to the table that I was not.
Yeah. I mean, it was a good time, I feel, to be a Sega fan.
Yeah. All right, well, that's going to wrap things up. So that's going to do it for this episode of Classic Gaming Quarterly. As always, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. I was going to offer, do you want to quickly flick through that Sega newsletter? Because it's only a few pages long.
Yeah, let's do it. I mean, I don't have it on hand, so you're going to have to describe it to me, but that's...
Oh, that's true. I'm sorry. I forgot about that. You can't see it, but I'll just tell you what's there. So this is bonus coverage.
Yeah.
Like I said, this is pretty short. So, and it's really not in very good condition. Whoever owned it originally, they took a red pen and colored in Sega, like the little white lines in the middle of the Sega font has all been colored in red, and it's a little bit discolored. I don't care. These are not cheap from what I've seen.
Right.
Trying to find one on eBay.
Does it look like they sat down and sat down specifically to color that in, or do you think that it happened? Because a lot of times when I color in stuff like that, it's just because I'm like on the phone and doodling on something.
Yeah, I would say this. I would put this into the on the phone and doodling category. Like maybe he was on hold.
Right.
He was probably on hold with the Sega game counselors because there was this one jokester who used to call and monopolize their time. Yep. So I can imagine somebody else having to be on hold. So this is issue number 5 from January of '89, and the two cover stories, like I said, Reggie Jackson baseball, and then the big cover story is R-Type, and it's too bad you can't see it, but. It's got like this hand-drawn R-Type artwork on the front that looks really, really cool.
Does it include the first stage boss?
Yeah. Yep.
That's probably the most iconic thing.
But it looks like it was drawn with like colored pencils.
That's cool.
But I mean that like in a good way. And then on the inside cover is a Master System ad, again from Toys R Us, interestingly enough. And but it doesn't say anything about price or anything like that. It just says, from Thunderblade to Monopoly, we've got a huge selection for the serious Sega fanatic. Kind of odd that they would use Monopoly as, what they wanted to have as a system seller. But I think at that point the game was new.
I don't think the Thunderblade's a very good version either. Not that the Genesis version was any better either. But.
And then they've got, a letter from the editor over here talking about some new games coming out, including R-Type. Golvelius, which I've never played Golvelius, and I really want to. Rambo 3, I've never played the Master System version of Rambo 3, but the Genesis version is one of my favorite Genesis games, actually.
Yes, it's the Genesis game is very good. The Master System version, I think, is a light gun game.
Oh, well yeah, it says it right here, actually, yeah. Unholster your light phaser and take on some of the baddest commandos ever to cross a pixelated screen. And then Reggie Jackson baseball, and then Poseidon Wars 3D. I've never played a 3D game on the Master System. Did you have the 3D glasses?
Yes, I still have them, actually. They're hidden away. I never found the effect very convincing. It was not worth the effort. The only one I really played significantly was probably Space Harrier 3D, and even that was nowhere near as good as the original.
The next page we have Mailbag, which is kind of interestingly is split up into like sections. So like the first section is just called Mailbag and just has people, mostly calling or writing in and just sort of kissing up to Sega, but I love your video games or whatever. This is kind of cool. This person says, last month I ordered the top 10 videotape from the magazine. I wish I had a copy of that. I should look on YouTube though.
Interesting. I wonder. I never even heard of that. If anybody watching this has that and has a link to it online, I'd be very curious to see what's on it.
Well, there's definitely. I mean, a lot of that stuff is on YouTube now, so it's worth looking.
Yeah.
And then they have like some game tips that people have sent in. Mm-hmm. And then over here there's Ask the Sega Master. So maybe this was pre Bill Kunkel. And, people are just asking, basic questions about how to do this, that, or the other thing.
It doesn't have any real name associated with it?
I mean, the people that wrote in, their name is there, but it doesn't have a name of like the author of who answered these.
I see. It's probably just one guy sitting in a closet.
Yeah. Oh, although there's a tip in here about Power Strike. That's pretty cool.
Oh. As I believe that Power Strike is another compile game. They're just all over the place.
Okay, on the next page we actually have it's an artwork contest. Like people have sent in their fan art. It's weird. I kind of already feel like this magazine is a little bit cooler than Sega Visions was. And then down at the bottom here they have an ad for another videotape. It says all new second edition preview 10 upcoming Sega hits for only $7. Order the Sega Games Preview 2 VHS videotape.
Yeah, I also feel like I heard somebody talking about the Sega Preview videotapes recently.
Yeah, I got to see if I can find those online. And then there's actually an ad in here so this actually has ads, I guess, for not video games. Because there's an ad here from TSR for some kind of tabletop game. It says, I think, you think, I think. I don't know what that is, but it's just interesting to see that ad. Because like I said, we're already halfway through. So this is not a big thing. And so for them to sell ad space for something that's not even a video game just seems a little bit interesting.
Yeah.
Then they've got like a little feature here on R-Type with a few screenshots. They have a screenshot, of course, of the level 1 boss. They have a screenshot of the level 2 boss. And then they have just a screenshot of, the level 3 boss is just kind of like the entirety of level 3, I guess, because it's that huge ship.
Yeah.
And they have that in there.
It is a good version of R-Type.
And they have a little feature for Rambo 3 down here, which doesn't really look that great. I'd still like to try it, but...
No, it's nowhere near as good as Rambo First Blood Part 2 on the Master System, which I think is one of the best games on the system. It's an overhead run and gun, but it's actually, it's just called Rambo in the US, and I think in Japan it was like Ashura, or something like that, and in Europe it was Secret Command. Very good game.
Then we've got a feature on Golvelius.
It's a good game. It's weird. It's got a variety of gameplay elements to it. It has overhead Zelda type, and then it has side-scrolling levels that almost feel shooter-esque with like a little bit of platforming. Your character only faces forward during it.
And then the other page is Reggie Jackson Baseball. And we talked about that already in Sega Visions, so there's no reason to do that. Oh, this is kind of neat. So on the next page, it says the Sega Software Checklist. How many of our exciting action-packed games do you own? And then, ostensibly this would be, all of the Master System games that are released to that point, but of course we don't really know that. But it's just kind of cool. It's the kind of thing where, like, back in the day, if I'd gotten a magazine, like this and seen that it was all marked up, I wouldn't like that. I'd want like a nicer copy. But like now, I think it's kind of neat because somebody actually went through here and checked a bunch of these. And boy, this kid had a lot of games, and you can tell he or she used the same pen for this that they used to color in the cover. And then they have a little coming soon blurb that just says, so at this point, what year did I said this was January of 89, right? Yep. So it says coming soon, winter, they have Poseidon Wars 3D, East, The Vanished Omens, and Reggie Jackson Baseball. And then it just says for spring, we have Walter Payton Football, California Games, which we talked about, and then Altered Beast, which they show a screenshot of.
Oh.
And then on the other page here, this is kind of cool. There's an ad. It's an ad for Master System games, but it's an ad from Activision. So it's a pretty neat ad. So it's got 3 Activision releases. It's got Cyborg Hunter and then 3 screenshots, Bomber Raid and then 3 screenshots, and then Rampage with 3 screenshots. And then what's interesting is, I don't know if you guys can see this on camera, but the Rampage box has been X'd out with, again, that same red pen.
Ah.
So this kid was very anti-Rampage, I guess, which is too bad. I love Rampage.
It's Rampage on the Master System is maybe the best version.
And then one cool thing I think about these Activision games, I can't think of another example of this, but you would probably be better equipped to do so, is that these Activision releases did not follow the sort of unified box art template
Right.
Of Master System games.
I mean, they still have a grid to them, but...
Indeed, but like Cyborg Hunter and Bomber Raid are both black, and then Rampage is red.
Almost Genesis-esque.
And then, so now I think we're on the last page here. So over here, oh, this is kind of neat. It's an order form. You can order Sega accessories, but not accessories like controllers and stuff, but like swag.
Anything good?
They got T-shirts, ball caps, athletic bags, beach towel, tons of like posters. They've got some T-shirts for specific games. So it's the kind of stuff that, like, if you had some of that stuff now, that would be like really awesome. And it's all pretty cheap. Mm-hmm. Like, they're selling T-shirts for $7.50. They want more for a poster. They want $10 for a poster, but a T-shirt's only $7.50.
What is the poster of?
It's an Afterburner poster. So
I wonder if that's the
you would have been all over that.
But I mean, I wonder if that's that big Afterburner poster that Joe Redifer has in GameSack that's on his background, because I should ask him about that sometime, because he has a big Afterburner poster. It's just enormous. And if that was like $7 or whatever,
well, that would be, well, no, $10.
$10. I mean, that's a heck of a deal.
Talking about my Afterburner poster? It's mine. It's mine, you hear? No one talks about it but me.
Yeah, for sure. And then interestingly, they only have one game. They have all this other stuff, and then at the bottom it says Power Strike game, and it's $29.99. So I'm just asking, was Power Strike maybe mail order only or something? Just because that game's pretty rare, isn't it?
I've never seen it.
Oh, never mind. I'm so dumb. Over here on the other page, it actually says available only through this newsletter. Power Strike, act now, limited quantities.
Wow.
So maybe that was the only way in this country to get Power Strike.
It's got to be a pretty rare game then.
It is rare. Yeah, I mean, that's an expensive game if you want to buy it now.
Yeah.
And then this might be of more interest to you. Down here at the bottom, it says Phantasy Star rebate offer.
Oh.
You can send them the UPC symbol and they'll send you $5, or you can have them send you a coupon for $5. Then I guess you just take that to like KB Toys or whatever.
Well, that's worth it. I mean, Phantasy Star was extremely expensive. I remember blowing all of my birthday money on it for that year.
Well, it's worth it though.
It was worth it. I didn't feel like it was worth it until probably a month or two after I bought it, though, because I didn't understand how to play it for the longest time.
Yeah, well, that's the problem that I referenced earlier. You know, I didn't know what I was doing with role-playing games.
Right.
And then on the back cover, I don't know, have you ever heard of this? We didn't have this. It says Child World Children's Palace, your official Sega headquarters.
Children's Palace.
Yeah.
It's very much was like a Toys R Us competitor.
Oh, all right. Okay. Well, we didn't. As far as I know, we didn't have that on the West Coast.
Yeah,
I've never heard of it.
I don't know if I'm mixing it up with something else though. There was another place that was very similar to Toys R Us called like Crystal Castle, the Crystal Castle.
Mm-hmm.
That I might.
Well,
be
I mean, it seems like
that.
what you're saying is true because they're saying right here that they have a huge selection of Sega Master System stuff. So it would make sense if it was.
That might have been where my mom got Alex Kidd in Miracle World.
Oh, cool. So anyway, that's it for the Sega. It's Sega, the Team Sega newsletter from January of '89. So there's a little bit of bonus content for you guys.